titled Opportunities, and I think that was a tiny bit random on the part of Chris and I, like, because challenges, opportunities, and we've already seen that some of our challenges are opportunities and very much vice versa. I'm just going to let you know basically what we asked our panelists to do for this piece of the program. We asked people to think about what opportunities are available for humanities scholars to expand the ways we do research, the forms we publish our work in, and how we reach broader public audiences, which is the question that we asked as a prompt. So this time, the people who responded are going to kick us off, and then the people who kicked us off last time will respond. So there's a lot of symmetry here. So thanks, everybody. So whoever wants to get started, whatever order you want to go in. Yeah. Oh, sure. Heather, you're right there. Why don't you start?
So I thought, how better to understand some of the opportunities than to show you some of the really cool work that folks are doing. And so I came up with 3 examples from some of the projects, the fellows that ACLS has funded, trying to show a range of what I see as exciting, innovative, collaborative, community-engaged, societally impactful kinds of work. The first 2 examples I would call public humanities, although both come out of different places in the universities, which I think will be interesting for folks in the room. And then the third one is more recognizable as a monograph, but also gets to the question about slightly different forms. So the first project that I wanted to talk about came out of the Sustaining Public Engagement Grant Program. So this was a program that ACLS funded with NEH money. It came out of the COVID moment. ACLS gave grants to 24 institutions in the US, from 18 states and Puerto Rico. And really it was to try to fund public humanities programs that were being adversely affected by the pandemic in various ways. So this particular program had already existed, but the ACLS grant was to go towards what they were envisioning and moving towards. So this is the Baltimore Field School. It is run out of a public humanities program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And they give a minor. And so this particular field school is a collaboration where they work with community organizations. They had already been working towards a model of co-creation. I think, Antoinette, maybe you said that, right? So not a model where the community is the place for extractive research, but rather a collaboration between equal partners. And so this particular grant allowed them to hire 6 community fellows from a range of organizations in Baltimore, and then 11 fellows at UMBC, including graduate students and faculty, who were thinking about the process of what does ethical humanities research, teaching, and learning look like. And then the community fellows were really were picking and organizing the community-centered projects. And they did this work in the areas of public information, racial equity, and food and land justice. So that is example number 1 to get the imagination going. Example number 2. Here. There we go. Okay, so this is, this is not quite this. Okay. I wanted to show you the archive, but I'll just, a little awkward here. But this is an example coming from another ACLS program called the Digital Justice Grant Program, which is funded by the Mellon Foundation. So these grants go to projects that diversify the digital domain, advance justice and equity in digital scholarly practice, and/or contribute to public understanding of racial and social justice issues. So Chesapeake Heartland is a collaborative project that brought together Washington College with the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and multiple grassroots partners on the eastern shore of Maryland. So a lot of the folks who were at the center of this project coming from Washington College were based in the Starr Center for the Study of the American Experience, which I think is their humanities-like center. And I noted that 2 of the people based at the center were actually community historians. So it looks like already in the conception of what humanities space is, they are working collaboratively with partners who are not professors in the academy, but members of the community. So this particular project is a digital archive where it's a co-creation with members of marginalized rural Black communities who are themselves working to collect, share, and interpret their own histories, but doing so in collaboration with academic historians and archivists. So you can't see it really here, but it's like a really cool digital archive. There's photos, there's videos, just a really, really neat example of co-creation. And the third example I said was slightly different. So this is a monograph. This is a monograph by Susan Birch called Committed. Let's see the rest of the title. Committed, Remembering Native Kinship in and Beyond Institutions, published by UNC Press in 2021. Susan Birch is a professor of American Studies at Middlebury. She won an ACLS fellowship in 2019. What's significant about this book, in part, is that it is open access. And I had the privilege of listening to Susan Birch talk at the ACLS annual meeting a year ago, and she talked about how open access is really only one part of what she thought as being essential about having an accessible piece of writing. So it was open access, but she also wrote in accessible language. She did not use technical terms. She wanted her research to be able to be read by the members of the community, indigenous communities with which she worked. These kinds of decisions translated also to the typeface that she used, the font, the fact that it was available in multiple formats. The ebook was offered for free, so all of us can go read this. And there's text that accompanies any visual illustrations. So Susan Birch talked in part at our meeting, not just because she was an awardee of an ACLS fellowship, but also because we were kicking off an initiative called Path to Open. So the Path to Open initiative is a 3-year pilot that's really trying to think about and deal with open access, to try to come up with an alternative funding model that does not stress any one point of the system in terms of publishing open access. And I'm not the expert on this, but I'll just say that the idea is that for 3 years, the books are available through JSTOR, library subscriptions, they're available to buy, and then after that they become open access, right? So it's looking for some kind of different kind of a model. And so this initiative is also accompanied by an open access book prize. So there's the ACLS part that goes to the author of an open access monograph. There will be 2 awards, and they're accompanied by an open access publishing award that is funded by the Arcadia Foundation. And this part of the award will go to the publisher to fund future open access projects. So getting to the core challenge of viewing open access projects as equal to and as prestigious as non-open access traditionally written monographs, I think this prize is really trying to generate excitement and also prestige for people, scholars who want to publish in an open access fashion. I could talk about tons more, but those are 3 examples that I thought would be illustrative of opportunities.
And I'd like to invite whoever wants to go next. It's pretty informal, so go ahead, Paula.
So as you can tell, I'm interested in assessment, evaluation, and credentialing and things. So I'm just going to talk about some things that are going on nationally you may or may not already know about in terms of assessing the impact of these alternative kinds of faculty output. So the University of Minnesota has a really interesting program in relation to tenure and promotion assessment, where they have a parallel process of review for community engaged scholarship that runs alongside and is part of the tenure review. There's a panel that they empanel a group of experts from within the university community who have expertise in community engaged scholarship. As part of the tenure review of anybody who indicates that they're coming up in community engaged, with work in community engaged scholarship. And that panel produces evaluation that goes to the tenure committee and is taken seriously by the tenure committee. I don't know the details, how seriously it is taken, but it's an enshrined part of the university process for evaluation of community engaged, recognizing that there are folks on their campus who have expertise in this area, who may not be on the tenure committee, but can help the tenure committee understand the value of the work. So I felt that was a good practice. They indicate the purpose of the review committee is threefold: to develop community-engaged scholars' capacity to present engaged scholarship and promotion dossier, to educate P&T committee members about standards for high-quality community-engaged scholarship, and to provide internal reviews of the work of participating community-engaged scholars who are seeking promotion and or tenure. I direct your attention, and I will give all these links to Stephanie to share, to Michigan State University, which is also working in this area. Sonia Fritchie, William Hart Davidson, and Christopher Long had an article last year in Change magazine that's worth taking a look at, called Charting Pathways of Intellectual Leadership, Values-Based Criteria for Evaluation. And I think that's come up in this discussion earlier, the notion, I forgot to hit my timer, damn it.
Oh, you're fine, Paula. Don't worry, it's a little loose, yeah.
Time's up, so.
So this article lays out, MSU is at the heart of the Humetrics HSS initiative, which you may know. So it's an attempt to encode values at the center of evaluation of humanities work. So not their values, but your values.
Exactly.
You determine what your values are, and then you determine how you would assess for those values. And Humetrics is a kind of a it's a separate organization that Michigan State is at the heart of, but they will come to your campus. They will help you develop your criteria. So it's not the only outfit that does that does this kind of work, but it has been around for a long time, Mellon funded initially at least, and is very skilled at asking you the kinds of questions that help you determine what you want to evaluate for. That I think perhaps worth noting in relation to the way they use this at Michigan State is this has proven to be a tremendous recruitment and retention tool for them, for faculty members. That this has had great results for them in getting the kind of faculty they want to get and keeping the kind of faculty they want to get. And they have documentation of how efficient and effective that has been for them. And that's an aspect of this we don't talk often about, losing faculty who you really respect and value because you haven't produced a framework that would value their work. I also wanted to highlight for you the process that's ongoing at Wilfrid Laurier Press in Canada from Wilfrid Laurier University. They have a really fascinating open peer review process for podcasts. And I don't know whether any of you have seen this, but it was initially funded by the Social Science and Humanities, what's it called? The Canadian body that funds that stuff.
Yeah.
Sure. And it's a fascinating process of where academic or kind of partly academic peer, podcasts submit seasons of their work, and then the press picks out representative episodes from the podcasts, has open peer review with external reviewers. Those reviewers submit their feedback on the podcast, and then the podcaster gets a chance to respond to the feedback. It's all an open process. It started out being entirely written, and then the reviewers themselves said, this seems kind of weird to do this kind of written assessment. Couldn't we do this, orally as well? And so now you can go to the site for Wilfrid Laurier Press. You can listen to the peer reviews. You can listen to the responses. And then what I find really interesting about this is that Wilfrid Laurier Press is then using that feedback to decide actually whether to publish a monograph of the podcast. So to make a physical book out of the podcast, which I was really surprised that was at the end of this process. The overall evaluation in their framework is, does the podcast series as it stands make a significant contribution to its field? Question 1. Question 2, do you recommend publication of the podcast under the imprint of WLU Press? So they're fudgy about what publication of the podcast would mean. But I listened to these evaluations. They were fascinating. The Pioneer reviewed podcast was something called Secret Feminist Agenda that came from, I don't know if any of you have heard this, pretty funny. Hannah McGregor at Simon Fraser University is one of the minds behind Which Please, which was a fabulous semi-academic podcast about the Harry Potter series for many years. And there was a big article in the Chronicle about it a few years back. And it was, I've never heard such masterful kind of use of adaptation theory, Foucault, all the kind of relevant academic theories translated for people who are an intelligent, humanities informed, but not necessarily academic audience. And now this is a spin-off series that she does that's going through this evaluation. So these are just some examples of assessment frameworks.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Paula. Thank you.
I want to talk quickly about 3 things: the orientation of the work, the expansion of the forms of assessment, and dissemination. And you can remember back to 9 o'clock, I was described as a philosopher of education, and I've always sort of taken this work, even when I'm doing university level policy work, as an epistemological project. Who gets to say what counts as knowledge? Who gets to be included in that community? And so this work really does, that's the orientation I'm bringing. Although I love Chris Long and I love values, so it is, so the values orientation and even the ontological orientation do play a part in this as well. But, so for the orientation of the work, everybody's had a Mellon grant. Everybody won a Mellon grant. Imagining America, we got a Mellon grant as the co-PI with Erica Coleranis, who's the faculty director of IA, and we did a project to try to figure out how we could get institutions to lift up and support and build the infrastructure around publicly engaged scholars. Started off, I think Mellon wanted us to come up with this toolkit, one-size-fits-all toolkit for redoing your tenure and promotion things. And having done the tenure and promotion redo at Syracuse, I was like, I don't really want to do that again. Plus, I didn't think that it would work because institutions are starting at a different place. They have different buy-in to various parts, and even at an institute. So we'll have 11 schools and colleges. Working with that kind of an institution was very tough because even in the schools and colleges, they had different definitions of what impact was. So we kind of slid away from that a little bit and really did start to think about what are the everyday experiences of the leadership of institutions that want to change, of the faculty, and of the community members who have relationships with institutions. We did 50 interviews, and then we had, going back to the grad student question, we had 2 groups of grad student fellows who did 2 different research projects on the grad student experience. But it was all very, I will say, it was very, there was no huge change of revelations. They were very similar. My biggest revelation and takeaway was that people, even though they might have struggled to find their place, they made their place, and they want to stay in academia. And that was in a way, the biggest revelation, because I had some of these interviews where I'm crying because their experiences are so terrible, and yet they're like, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm willing to put in the work. And I do think that's one of the conclusions we came to, is that faculty who have more power than they are often willing to acknowledge, that the obstacles are actually sometimes the colleagues who are down the hall, who go out with you for a beer, but when it comes time to put things on the line, they think, oh, I can't change that, that's the provost's job. No, it's our job. And that goes to a little bit to the assessment piece, which is what I heard as we were trying to change our tenure standards, was that I don't know how to assess that stuff. You know, I know all about 18th century. Why do we pick on 18th century?
I don't know.
But we do. It's like a go-to fall guy. We know all about that, but we don't know about this other stuff. And I'm here to just say a loving horseshit. I definitely believe it about humanities scholars, but I actually believe it about the enterprise. I think that we do. We know more about assessment than we give. It's sometimes the language in which we're asked for it that seems like, I don't know how to. I assessed chemists for 10 years, architects, drama people, musicians, and I felt perfectly competent to do it. And if I can do it, you can too. So I just think part of it was a kind of, I think that Antoinette mentioned fear as a driving factor, that really is a paralyzing feeling. I can't change the world, I can just hang on to what I have, and I can replicate myself in my grad students, in my colleagues, and therefore protect the land that I care about so much. But the co-creation project, I think, is one that matters. It matters in the world. It matters to invite people, whether they're undergraduate students, whether they're community partners, into relationships of trust around knowledge. And so from my point of view, I think we are capable of making those projects work, but we have to sweep away some of that infrastructure nonsense that Antoinette talked about so ably. Dissemination, well, I talked a little bit about assessment earlier in response to a question, but Tim Eatman was mentioned earlier as part of one of the co-authors of the Tenure Team Initiative document, and he came from Michigan, where IA started, to Syracuse. All the networks are the networks. He was a grad student of mine in Illinois, you know. But then he came, and we brought him there to be the research associate for Imagining America when we inherited the institution. And then he was a faculty member in the School of Ed. He had come up for tenure. He had been the co-director, co-faculty director, and so he wasn't producing monographs or even really like a lot of refereed journal articles. What he was doing was changing campuses all across America. And so Dean of Education, myself, and Tim sat down and said, we've been talking about this as an epistemological project. We're going to construct your dossier as a different sort of a demonstration of what knowledge you're producing and encouraging. And so he had all these videos of him giving speeches, doing workshops across the country, these presidents of institutions just saying, this is the voice of the future, blah, blah. So we made the first completely digital dossier, and believe me, it was work, not to get the material, but to convince my colleagues in the School of Education that it was an actual dossier, but it was a demonstration of the work. And I think, so again, from my perspective, I was like, you can, just as you can make an evaluation about the quality of the press that a book is produced in or quality of the journal, you can make a determination about the quality of the venues in which this person is making change. And we get the evaluation from these people saying, this 2-day stint here was life-changing for an institution. So we have the tools, but we have to recognize them, we have to elevate them. And then for dissemination, I already heard a little bit about it, but I think about a colleague of mine from New York University, or as I mentioned, A.B. Carson, who are producing digitized, mediated products that may go against others. I hope that we'll continue to read books. I do think we need to continue to read books, but I also think there's other ways of linking projects, and Jack Chen's done a masterful documentary on the Chinese Exclusion Act, and these are pieces that otherwise people wouldn't probably pick up a book, but they are willing to watch an hour and a half documentary because it's so compelling. It uses images, it uses knowledge in different ways, and so again, could go on, but I just think that there are opportunities out there if we will pick them up and clutch them to our bosom softly and lovingly.
Love it.
I'd add something. I think existing standards will remain and they'll stick around. So I think the people doing innovative work have a burden to do usually both, and they will not be able to opt out of the one book or something and suddenly do other things. So I think that's to be recognized. So those people should be really supported institutionally. The ways to do this, one of them is, I think, to lend prestige to such projects. So Jack Chen, who was a colleague of mine at NYU, is co-founder of the Museum of the Chinese in America, was actually had not an easy time getting tenure at NYU because his work didn't fit into some categories. So he had to do double the work. And he knows that, and that's not totally uncommon for someone like him in any case, so it's not like he was new, but he needed a lot of support. I think bestowing prestige can be in the institution. So actually to really understand how you're talking about work and to not continually say, oh, it's different, other, new, innovative, so bizarre, but just say, this is a genuine product. This film, the way you just talked it up, it's actually, this is as valuable as a book or something like that, this documentary. Secondly, I think there's a risk because everything is quantified in universities and scholarship in the humanities is hard to quantify. So I have I actually run 2 podcasts, like a New Yorker cartoon. I don't have one, I have 2. But I have one that's a kind of academic-based podcast. I think I have 180 episodes. They are 80 or so on free speech and 60 on great books. And everything from, I don't know, from The Sun Also Rises to Chinua Achebe, and there's always a guest, there's always a scholar. I stopped looking at the numbers because I have tenure and I need to prove to any dean anymore that I have 90,000 downloads on this one episode. But the metrics would matter. So instead of that, I'm part of a Humanities podcast network, which we formed across institutions of higher learning, independent scholars, independent schools, big schools, small schools, to sort of give more weight to this enterprise. And what you said, Paula, about the kind of assessment by this Canadian outfit, that's a really great way of doing it. But this cannot be sucked into another one of saying, these are the good podcasts because we know these 10 names and you got picked up by Spotify, which is people ask me all the time, have you been picked up by Spotify? I'm like, one of my podcasts actually, yes, and it's the lesser one. It's because Spotify, like the other one, because that's sort of celebrities. And so I think the second part, you sent some guidelines for the art school here. I think the guidelines have to be very specific and spell out in some detail what are possible projects, and not just say, other work that's not the monograph. Say, what is that work? Curating a show, producing, it has to be a list of things, and it can be a sentence for each thing. What is that thing? Rather than, there's all this other stuff that we don't really know about, and you should really pay attention to it. So I think it should be very specific on the department level. It could even be, and I'm sorry I don't know your name, but the letters that got solicitation, letters of solicitation should actually say, please pay attention in this dossier, what you did, particularly to these types of work, and name them. And don't just say, you can guess what that is. Here's a link to a website. I'm sure you find it really innovative. Like, are we supposed to look at websites now when you write letters of recognition? Yes, we are actually, but that's new. And you said in these guidelines, it should ideally not be a screenshot. And then I was like, what is it going to be? Are you going to watch a video for an hour and a half? So in some ways, be very specific about what all those new things are. Are there some ways in which to assess their quality? To say, oh, this one is linked to another network. This one is in this Canadian assessment system. This one is a show that it's been produced by X, Y, or Z. So give people the guidance to understand, I have no idea what this is, but it looks prestigious because they gave me the 5 things that make it prestigious. And then someone said earlier, I think you said you published early in Science, the feminist kind of journal. There was an invention of a field, but it was really important to found a journal that then was anchored by people with prestige. So Kate Stimson, one of our colleagues, was one of the founding editors of this. It's really important to do that, and for people in our positions to lend our names and our institutions and our prestige to these projects. Alenda, you're doing this kind of at an associate level, but it's hard work for you. But to uplift all these new things, and they need the credibility from us. So I think this is a useful example. Science used to be this weird, radical, wild thing that women did, and suddenly it's like, oh wow, it's a real academic journal, right? So it legitimates, and there is that possibility. So I think it's not so hopeless to say this won't work. And then out of my podcast, I published a couple people, so Raphael Walker, Cal Gilligan, Vivian Gornick, Kate Simpson have all written introductions to books because they did a podcast with me, and I convinced them, they're very fancy people, and I convinced them to say, I can't pay you, but you will be in classrooms and your scholarship will be available to the next generation. They said, oh, I said, I'm not paying you Norton fees or something, I'm not paying you $10,000 for this, I'm paying you nothing, but your essay will be read. That mattered much more to them. And that meant I got senior people to participate in a project that's relatively new to them. And they said, oh, actually this is another venue of reaching an audience, which totally reframed it all. And they don't have to be going through the assessment process. But if you have one of those names doing that, and then you can point to that and say, here's Professor X, Y, and Z, these fancy people who are doing it. And here's a junior person who's in the same category that looks like, oh, so the fancy people also did it. So I'm kind of thinking shifting this is all innovative, new, this next generation, and they're working, online, and we don't know what it is. You have to point to examples where this has worked for somebody who actually did it because they believed in it versus they needed to do it. And I think MLA, ACLS, all of that, you're working on these guidelines. They're going to have to be continually updated. That's important, and that's not a bad thing that they get updated, so this should be what people can refer to. But for provost offices to be able to say, oh, we have these general MLA guidelines, that's really, really useful already. Everything that has a name like that, an acronym, people think, oh, it's legit. And that's a good thing, rather than our university is so innovative and we're doing it alone. Like what you're saying, it's across important institutions. So I think lastly, I'd say one other thing. I think the humanities have to continually over-communicate what they do, constantly, because it's harder to grasp for people for some reason. It's much easier. And if you go to any website of any big leading institution, it'll name the winners of the following prizes. And it's this, and the funding, and it's N of this, and it's gazillions of dollars and all that. And it's like humanities, like, oh, you got a minor grant, and the prestige goes in the other direction. And that's a teaching opportunity for us to teach everybody. You could lead with that. It's actually also cheaper to do research in the humanities than in the sciences. For some bizarre reason, universities should privilege that. But I think all of that is a way to reframe this. And as all of you know, it's really hard to do it without just going quantitative and saying, yes, there's this many books that were published last year in the humanities versus this many grants given. So I'll stop right here.
Thanks, Dylan.
I want to just push back on the idea that I think the monograph will always appear. I'm not saying get rid of it, but I'm saying, I gave the example of A.D. Carson for a reason. Yeah. It is a writing project, but it's also a culture project. And I went to a online session where the University of Michigan Press talked about their process of deciding to do it, who they assembled, again, because they're a big press. They didn't want to make a mistake. They wanted to be the leading edge of something, and I think to the extent that we can support those efforts, it is not the monograph, but it's not only the monograph. I just wanted to push back.
I think it's a really good question is to say, how do you talk about it without saying it's not the monograph? Like this, but you also said this is an amazing thing. So, this
and it's
person
published by a recognized. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the other piece. It is being
So
published
the
by a.
legitimacy
But one of the things that I worry about, and I will promise I'll let the respondents respond, but the idea that if we hire somebody who's doing creative practice, for example, within an English department, they have to produce a monograph as well as the creative practice, or they have to produce the public scholarship and then the monograph, and that's what's happening now. And I would like to see that not happen. I mean, how do we allow that? Why do we, that seems to me, that's for me the root of the problem. Is it really, do they have to all do double the work and aren't they going to get burned out and fed up and just bugger off? I mean,
Yes. I mean, one other piece that we changed too was when we had people who were appointed across schools, they had to do double the evaluation. They had to be evaluated up the chain, and I was like, we cannot do that because we're recruiting these people because they're so valuable across large swaths. So we changed it so that it is, they get evaluated in their departments or programs, and then it all goes up one shoot. And so they're not doing two separate.
right.
And so I think we
It's
need
something
to
to
keep
think about.
it in mind.
We have to think about that. So let me let you all
just did
respond.
that.
Oh, go ahead.
For joint appointment.
Yeah,
That
we're set up now to.
Yeah.
We're set up to do the one
To
stream,
streamline.
not the
Yeah.
two streams. Awesome.
Yeah.
Making progress. So who would like to begin?
I can start.
Yeah, go ahead, Alenda.
This way. So I wanted to actually follow up on Heather's discussion of open access because it's dear to my heart. Because I am actually, I am the founding co-editor of a journal of environmental media called Media and Environment, which is the UC Press's, I believe, first Humanities open access journal. And we have basically had to invent our funding model. And because we don't want to charge authors APCs, which are article processing fees, which is very common for the sciences where they write those fees into their grants. Like you have to pay, $1,500 to publish this open access. And we are a diamond open access journal, so, we're in the DOAJ, it's like all this stuff. And I'm also the special features editor for the Journal of Cinema and Media Studies, and that's all the open access stuff, which includes professional notes, archival news, and teaching media, which is a separate thing. And so what I've noticed working with my colleagues all around the world is that obviously in Europe, there's much more support, institutional support for open access. And oftentimes authors, like scholars, are required to actually publish open access for their monies. So in order to get funds.
Because they get federal funds.
Right, exactly. So there's an infrastructural issue. And then also with the libraries, which are our dear partners as well, a lot of, even the subvention funds, if they do exist, only support monographs that are for open access and not other kinds of scholarship. So it's just, there are all these things particular to our country and to our institutions that are both challenges and opportunities.
How do you fund the journal?
Oh my God. Let me count the ways. Institutional co-sponsorships. We have a Cressy Wolf Center on our campus that gives us funding and supports the graduate student to be our coordinating editor, but the editors are doing it all for free, and yeah.
More free labor.
Yeah, we're going to partner with Princeton now, and so there's a lot of other stuff, but yeah, it's making it up as we go. So I don't know if you have thoughts or if other people have thoughts about also normalizing this for tenure and promotion, because I have colleagues who won't publish in like Elsevier journals or something like that. So it's also constraining the kinds of publication venues that they can have because of an ethical orientation. So all these things just came to mind.
Thanks, Alenda.
Should I go next?
Yes.
So I found myself thinking along two lines. One was the who, like of who is going to do, who leads the chain or co-leads this kind of conversation, let's say at a given university. And so I wanted to put on the table, going back to the challenges where we started, the faculty administration divide or sometimes civil war in some places. And I think I can say distrust in most universities. So how to, and I do think the intergenerational conversation is part of the answer, but just I'd love to talk a little bit more in this group about the who, because we clearly need what a colleague of ours at ACLS, Javon Bickerstaff, calls third space leaders, so people who are not in department chair positions or and would never, on pain of death, serve in a dean job, because that's just not what that's not how they define. They define as insurgent and resistant or revolutionary, but they're crucial to the conversation. So how to bring them in and not be frightened of them, even when they often call administrators to account in sometimes painful public ways, but how to build a team. So it's third space people, it's chairs and deans, and it's finally the highest level, because one thing we've seen at ACLS, and we talked about this in the design workshop quite a bit, was that people are always very quick to kick to the other sector. You know, we can't change because the dean will be mad, the provost will be mad, the faculty won't have it, etc. You know, so the who. The second thing I just want to put on the table was can we design a whole new schema for promotion and tenure other than research, teaching, and service? And I do have some ideas about that, but I just want to put as another colleague of mine says, at ACLS says, put a flea in our ear about could we have a conversation about different categories?
Yeah.
So,
Thank you, Joy.
thank you. It's really, really interesting.
Antoinette.
Yeah, I just briefly want to say one thing. I think I'm furiously over here sending myself emails with book references. Because I think we're generating a bibliography.
Yes.
I want to add a book.
Chris, that's something for us.
A book to the bibliography, which some of you may know. It's Natalie Lovelace's How to Make Art at the End of the World, a manifesto for research creation, which does a few things that I think have been, echoed here, and that is to track her own conviction about research creation at the emergence of the intersection of the arts and the humanities, but also to situate that experience in what she actively calls her neoliberal university in Canada, but also to sort of, I think, map the trajectory of the kinds of institutional changes that she both witnessed and was often subject to. And I think that it has a lot about pedagogy in there for people who are interested in the relationship between research, arts creation, and pedagogy. But it also, that neoliberal university question is a really important one, because I think we are all functioning in neoliberal universities.
Yep.
And I think, in about 2 weeks I'm going to be in Vancouver singing the song of public humanities, but under a different guise, which is 7 cautionary tales about the public humanities. Because there's as much cautionary and skeptical about that work, its extractive impact, the temporalities of our work and their work. The under-resourced here doesn't begin to describe under-resourced in those spaces, and how to do really impact assessment. Even impact assessment sounds like a blunt instrument, right? I mean, how to actually do the data walk with the folks that you're working with to make sure that the data that you're collecting actually is meaningful to them, all in reciprocal and redistributive ways that we need to be working with community partners that are really invisible inside the university. So very much, those are 2 things.
I want to respond to Joy on the question of the who, which has left out us.
All of us.
Right.
I was just from the university.
Yeah, no, so I just want to point
Yes.
to what I didn't point to in my own presentation, but what we did were, guidelines for the evaluation of digital scholarship, guidelines for the assessment of publicly engaged scholarship. If the MLA, issues these guidelines because they have the stamp of the MLA on them, they have some kind of national credibility that we can use. And those digital guidelines came out in 2002, then they came out again in 2013, and now they're coming out again because you've got to continually revise that stuff. And you can't do that campus by campus. That has to be done by national organizations like ours. But the problem Joy and I were talking about over our coffee, part of the problem is, we have some carrots, no sticks. from our organization. So we are not accreditors.
No.
Like ACS, the chemists, they can say whatever they want. When I was dean, I had social work in my bailiwick, and they had a lower teaching load than everybody else because their national accreditation demanded it, and I, was subject to their national accreditation. Likewise, ACAD, likewise the music. You know these outfits. If you want to be accredited, you have to abide by these standards. We don't have those in the humanities, and maybe it's time to start thinking about. We have a lot. The MLA has a ton of guidelines. We have a ton of recommendations for best practices, and some schools recognize those and abide by them, and most schools don't. So, yeah.
Yep. I want to ask something kind of what you said earlier, so people shouldn't then be expected to do both the book and the cool, innovative, exciting stuff. But I know a lot of junior faculty, so I'm in kind of formal or informal mentoring capacities, and I'm also, very much like an immigrant. I'm like, no, you're going to get tenure and then you'll get creative. And I feel like it's actually would be wrong for me to say, oh no, write your super innovative project, because it's out of your control. And they actually listen to me, they say, what? And I said, you do know that these letters first are solicited internally, and then there's another set, and I walk them through them, and like, wait, what? And said, don't make friends with too many people at conferences because they will be ineligible. And like, what? So, and then I say, okay, and then let's get back to it. And now, like, we're done because you have to finish your book.
Yeah.
It's too much time with me. It's 45. You have to finish your book. What are you doing sitting here? And I do actually think it's really important to talk about. We don't want to experiment on this generation, and so in some ways I don't want to say to somebody, oh no, you don't need that monograph. You do.
You do.
And you need
right
the
now,
press that matters in your specific subfield, which is always 18th century poetry. But I actually think it's really important because who are we?
Too late for me.
I'm totally in favor of that. But like, how do you actually have this conversation without putting those people at some kind of
why we're doing this.
Yeah,
This is the main reason I'm doing this,
right.
is so that because we do have to do that right now.
Yeah.
I don't want my early career colleagues to be guinea pigs. I don't want to throw them to the wolves, but I want them to get to the point where they feel they can do it and the infrastructure is there to support them.
But I just feel like I have to say, Tim, even and Julie Ellison 20 years ago said exactly the same thing.
I know.
Exactly.
I
We
not
haven't changed because we keep saying
I know
we
this
have to protect the younger generation. So I would like, what's going to break this up?
Yeah. Go ahead, Antoinette.
Just quickly, this may be really unpopular, and I will say I am the chair of the faculty board at the University of Illinois Press, but I think we make a mistake if we don't look more closely at what university presses anyway are actually doing to innovate around the sonnet form of the monograph. And I really think that there's some serious intellectual, epistemological, structural labor happening at university presses to accommodate within the prestige economy these alternative, playful, experimental forms. And it isn't just, you could look at University of Minnesota Press, which has Manifold, but everything that happens on the Manifold website, also not-funded, also is a real object in the world. So there's a simultaneity there. I think university presses get such a bad rap, and I think they're fully cognizant of this sea change, and they want early career scholars who are doing innovative work to push the boundaries. And I think we really should bring them into these conversations.
Absolutely.
More intentionally.
And that's what I'm going to be doing next semester, or even this fall, is bringing together some of those people doing that and putting them into conversation with the faculty.
And I just want to, the sonnet form question is really an interesting, more than just a metaphor. If you haven't read Tyemba Juss's book called Olio, it is the sonnet form, literally, repopulated and transformed beyond all recognition, yet legible, filled with African American history and poetry. Highly recommend if you want a manifestation of the sonnet form transformed from within.
It's for the
Pulitzer Prize winner poet Tyemba Juss. Olio.
Chris, you wanted to say something?
Well, just following up from this, really, and a few other things that have been said. I mean, and I'm new here, and so maybe a little utopian, but I really
Also
felt,
not burdened down.
well, have felt our new program in public scholarship as potentially this effective sort of third space where we're not in a discipline, we're not there to police anyone, we're there to give hopefully good advice, but also to help people find ways to like write the book they want to write, which doesn't mean ignoring all the university presses, it means being in closer contact with them. A lot of the work we're finding ourselves doing is actually trying to help make these matches with university presses, editors, and that's a very inscrutable process for a lot of assistant professors. Maybe you've got a mentor who introduces you, probably not, or maybe if their editor's long gone. And so helping facilitate these conversations, and I hope in being in contact with the university presses, being part of that, these sort of cutting edge changes with publishing. It's something that we felt in the program here, and it's exciting. We'll see how long the enthusiasm lasts, but so far so good.
I think so far so good. Yeah, Joe, and then
Sorry, I had to miss some of this, so I may be going over stuff that's already been raised, but I'm concerned about the de facto concentration of authority over assessment in university presses. The ways in which, partly in order to relieve ourselves of tense conversations within departments, we turn over the assessment of work to university presses, and for all the innovation, there's still a kind of notion in what you were saying that somehow they'll take care of the assessment of big projects, and they'll be more elastic. And it seems odd to me that we accede to that.
It's the same people who are writing the tenure letters, who are reviewing the manuscripts.
Well, for one thing, Lindsay Rodder said this like 22 years ago in an MLA thing that presses shouldn't have to be in a position of being the adjudicators of promotion and tenure. Harvard University Press.
So to Baer, then Bill, then Liz.
I want to pick up on something that Heather mentioned in the beginning and then that you brought up. The issue of extractivist research and extractivist impact, and I think if we think about guidelines, I think this is something really, really important to consider too. And you mentioned the reverse mentoring early on, right? So I think the faculty members who should be hopefully helping us this process of reverse mentoring and considering the extractivist impact, I think that is really important too, because I can think of many instances, where you can, go and interview people and then write your paper about somebody's fate without any consideration, for trauma and voice and agency and all of that. So this, our colleagues in the social sciences, they have IRV and all of those things, and that can be its own nightmare, right?
It is.
However, the ultimate goal of that is to not making things worse for anybody, and I think this whole notion of extractivist impact has to be a part of the conversation too.
Well,
and I think
IRBs do have to change. They are,
absolutely,
they were set up to solve a certain kind of a problem, and there's many more problems now.
Exactly.
And so there's a Canadian group that's done a new IRB type of oversight, giving very values-driven ethics about what it means to have a partner who's not a paid employee of your institution. Right. And so those resources are, I think, essential. And, it's not public scholarship to take a bunch of 18-year-olds into the community and turn them loose.
No.
That is not, those trust relationships
exactly.
take generations to fix once you've screwed it up. So.
And that's the problem with the public, is the time that it takes to build trust, especially, we think of a city like St. Louis, right? Think of the role of university within St. Louis. And how do we do that reparative public humanities? And we can't necessarily do it on the timeline of your tenure dossier. So does that mean that scholarship, that kind of reparative work is not available then? So that's something that has to also be considered. So, but I think the extractivist piece is, yeah, we can't suddenly have people running willy-nilly into the community.
Or over across the world too.
Across the world or in the community, whatever that community might be. Bill.
Yeah, first of all, hi everybody, thank you for being here. Go Illini.
Every go online.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to be blunt, which is I'm an interested faculty member. We are hiring lots of excellent people in English who do both traditional scholarship and forms of creative practice. I would like to see them get tenured on either of those they choose. But until I get a document signed in something more permanent than ink from a dean's office that says this will count in a humanities frame as a tenurable piece of work, I will never advise anyone not to write a monograph ever. And so I know that we minimize our own power, authority, and responsibility as faculty members, I have no doubt. But in this, I think you have to jump first, the deans and administrators, to make that initial platform possible. Until that happens, I would feel ethically compromised to recommend that someone.
Well, the dean
We have communicated that. There already is one.
There is one, so the English department has to put it in their own document.
Yeah. I didn't know that. Did we get a notice?
Could Andrew maybe speak to that a little bit? I know you want to, I'm not.
This was the result of the design project.
Yeah, where did it happen, and can we find out more about it?
We're so silent.
So this was communicated to chairs about a year ago now.
Really? Okay.
That we
Good for us to know this. But yes, that's
well,
right.
Well, that's.
But Bill, why would this reassure you if the outside evaluators didn't get that?
Exactly.
And say, I can't comprehend this product. You know, so let's just push it a little further. So that's
well,
great.
That,
but
from our view in the dean's office, we are completely open to the demonstrations of the ways that you've cleared the bar in a variety of contexts, and we're also, given that we're a school of arts and sciences, especially well set up for that. We don't have a problem with co-authored publications. We see that all the time. We look at physicists, where apparently if you blink when you walk by a laboratory, you get I always come up with weird exaggerations, but when you see
We get it,
300
Andrew.
people
You're
on
talking to your
article-
people here.
Yeah. So we're really well set up for that, and we're set up for the argument that the chair's letter needs to make in the dossier, that this is a dossier that clears the bar. Now, the problem, and you've identified it, is that the chair can't make that argument without the chorus of external referees backing that up. So that's the challenge, I think, the disciplinary work that has to happen, that includes the education of our good colleagues in our department about us being open to it, but also the wider network of external referees.
We do tell the external reviewers what counts
And that's
in our system.
Yep.
In the various schools have different things, but we tell them explicitly.
And we
This,
have to.
you will see some products that may not look familiar to you. Here's where we say
Absolutely.
for sure that it can count.
So can I just,
I think Liz wanted to say something, but Jessica, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, because earlier we were talking about who those external reviewers are, and I don't know if we've had communication from the dean's office about a wider catchment for, rather than full professors at peer or higher institutions, and that's
That's a harder conversation.
Yeah,
And,
so that's a piece of it.
Can I ask a question about that? Because we at my disciplinary association, we have lists of accredited external reviewers for departments. So we put folks through a training on how to be a good external reviewer for a department. They have to meet certain criteria, they have to examine certain things, and then they kind of get a stamp that they are an MLA accredited external reviewer.
I did not know this.
But what I'm interested in is that you're talking about tenure reviewers. And meeting certain standards, and I wonder would it help for disciplinary associations to to do, not, maybe, I don't know whether it would be trainings or whether it would be sets of criteria, but to say, new scholarship, new ways of demonstrating in your discipline. Here are senior scholars, who understand that and value that or have done work in that area, or, could we train people? I'm trying to think of the role of a national plan.
I talked about this actually at the Conference of Executive Officers last week of the executive directors. I know there was a conflict with them, but that is emerging among the 80 societies in ACLS to I mean, as a potential conversation, just keeping in mind that we have societies where the executive director is the only staff member of the society, so there are disciplines that that are very thinly staffed at that level. But anyway, but it is a lot. I think it's exactly the right direction in which to go. This doesn't preclude the problem of the one holdout who says in a department, no way. But then that's a problem. That's why teams are.
Yeah, and that's a problem. That's a thing that's a leadership question though. That's down to the chair. So that has to be. There's always that person.
Yeah.
They're across the board. Every institution, every department. There's one of those. So we have to maneuver around them. They can't lead the discussion. They can't be the way forward. Liz, go ahead.
Three things, I'll make it quick.
Oh, okay.
There's some wonderful ideas there. The idea of maybe having an advocate come to talk to the tenure committee in a department who is knowledgeable, because you may end up with tenure committees that have no experience and are afraid to risk. And so maybe finding someone from the dean's office who can talk not just to the chair, but to the whole committee could be productive. So that's one idea. The next is I'd love at some point to have folks address the changes in university presses, not intellectually in terms of the projects they support, but the absolute rock bottom funding problems. And I'm working with Yale University Press, and they're feeling it. So I think we really have a problem of the number of venues that are possible for our young scholars to work with, and I've seen it in the last 5 years. We're not out of COVID yet, but that's also even just an honest conversation about how university presses are not what they were 10 years ago when many of us went through it. And then the third thing is someone brought up a wonderful idea. Can there be a new calculus, a new refiguration of 40% teaching, 40% scholarship, 20% service? And especially when some of the work that's the most groundbreaking counts as service, and someone's doing 60% service. So we need to sort of break that up and have open conversations about what that reconfiguration can be, so that it's 30% groundbreaking scholarship, or something like that. So I'd love to hear more on any of those topics we're so glad you came.
Thank you. Well, thank you for those amazing questions. Let's just see what people have to say. And
one more.
I know, I'll come back to you, Kia, don't worry.
And I'm on the panels, I can.
Yes, that's true. She will be here later.
I mean, I'm moderating that panel.
Yeah.
So, two things. One is something that we're doing that I think is having some interesting effects in the terms of the education of our departments. We recently instituted a third-year review that we haven't done that happens at the dean's level. It's not an up-or-out situation. This is all about providing feedback to the candidates and giving them suggestions from that kind of broader perspective than just the department. One of the things that we found valuable is that we can reinforce this message of our willingness to consider a variety of ways to clear the bar. And we deliver that then not only to the candidate, but we do that in front of the chair. So like after we go through the whole process of combining all of the notes and suggestions, then I meet with the candidate and the chair, and I tell the candidate, I put the chair on the hook when I talk to the candidate about that, and that's is a good way. Now, whether or not the chair is able to communicate that out to their tenured faculty, maybe that's where they can invite me to come in and talk to them. The other thing on the crisis in university presses, I'm not sure that rhetorically is our best move. If we're talking about we need to show different ways to clear the bar because the book isn't working anymore, I don't know that gets the same amount of traction as we're seeing new kinds of scholarship that need new kinds of venues.
It's a framing thing. I mean, I think Liz makes a really
great
point.
It's an absolutely important part.
What you're saying,
it's real,
the
but
same thing, write the book. If there's not the press, it's hard.
Framing it differently.
But I think the framing is really important as we make these arguments.
I agree. Panels, would you like to comment on any of the things that have come up, including the crisis in university presses, as well as other things?
refiguring the calculus.
Oh, that one.
Yes. 2 by 3 categories?
Yes, go ahead,
Oh,
Joy.
Is 40-40-20 the
Yeah, I'm making that up, but I have.
It is,
No,
that's,
no.
we don't
I wasn't
have
sure
an
where that was
official
coming from.
calculus, but that's how we're told to think of things, yes.
Wow.
Or is it like 60,
60-20.
no, it's 60-30-10. Definitely, that's the
Professors don't do my stuff.
No, they don't
Yeah.
now, they used
So,
to.
yeah.
Those of us who were here back in the day remember. Yeah, I mean, the service is very limited for assistant professors here, as it should be. The problem is then you get then overburdened teaching track faculty and overburdened associate faculty who then get stuck at rank. I think the problem is trying to find ways to get the people who don't do service to do service, because it's the same people on the committees all the time, but this is a topic for another day.
And we have a whole report on it.
But yes, I did. Thanks for here. It was so much fun. But yeah, Joy, talk to us a little bit about your.
So here's 3. So I'm writing something up about this, as you might imagine. So here are 3 different categories. So and they're totally drawing on because it's just a start, the business world. In part because I'm trying to think and force myself to think of what it would be like to sit in front of a university president and provost who were not sympathetic and make this case. So I leaned in that direction for these labels. So so first, research R&D / incubation, like incubating knowledge.
Oh, they love that.
But like R&D, right? But here's the list: conference organizing, mentoring, teaching. I'm putting it intentionally in a mix.
Mentoring,
Acquiring new skills like new languages or digital skills or public writing. Building relationships with community members and community engaged research in high schools and incarcerated people and other partners. Evaluating students and colleagues' progress and things like exams and merit review. That's all R&D incubating knowledge. Number 2 is, I still have 3, just like this can only go so far in breaking the wheel, right? Projects or deliverables. Books, articles, publicly accessible writing, community engaged research publications, scholarship in various forms, podcasts, archives, graphic formats, creative formats. I can send this all.
It's going to be recorded, Liz. Don't forget. We can play that really slowly.
But finally here, developing and refining curricula and program design, because that too is a crucial deliverable. And you could add to designing community projects, or that something. It has to be a thing that's readable and circulatable. It falls in that category. And third, operations, assigning courses, overseeing department staff. Overseeing is not my favorite word. I should change that. Managing labor issues, conflict resolution, meeting committee management, relationships and advocacy within the university with the dean, the budget officer, sponsored programs, development, and budgeting work. So those are that's like a revamped service kind of category, but it's about making the university work, which is what service is. So
I love it.
R&D, projects, and operations. I could just hear colleagues in
Antoinette
various
has
institutions
something.
I work with saying, we hate
No,
this thing.
it captures so much nuance of the work that we already do. So
that's really the key goal, to get the spectrum recognized on the in whatever metrics we use.
If you want it to apply beyond R1s, you got to think about the students in the operations category. Work with students.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I was thinking about, when I was thinking about saying it to this group, R1 is a text. Oh, yeah. Sorry, R1 on Zoom. This is for starting with the R1, because it only gets more complicated the more you try to, but it would have to be more than tweaked, rewritten. Got it.
Antoinette.
So I really appreciate that category disruption. And I think it surfaces for me something I have been thinking about in the second hour, which is that, and I probably pathologize in my mockery of the single visionary model of scholarship, but I do think that you asked who is going to do this. University faculty, whatever their location, have to understand that they run the university, they have to invest in the running of the university, and they have to do the ethnography of it, and they have to understand where the IT sits and what the budget model is. in ways that most don't have the time or energy to do, let alone the cultural inclination. And this is radical because it recognizes, and I mean, in Illinois, I might just say, again, but operations, I mean, I just can't imagine, that category, people signing on for that. But I think it's really important to rethink who is running the university, because we're all running it, but we're not, the light is not being cast on all of those things. And of course, because the same people do all the service, this is not equally distributed, obviously, but it could be, it should be.
And it's not equally rewarded either, which is
and it's so
how-
gendered.
And
Can
I was
we
gonna
just
say,
say that?
I ran the committee on the status of women, and our study showed that immediately upon getting tenure, women got put on university committees, and they never escaped, and they therefore never did not rise up to full.
No, and they get stuck at rank. And MLA talked about this 20 years ago and more. I mean, it's, yeah, Kia.
Just ask a question, Joy. How does equity factor into these categories, or even DEI work, or is it threaded throughout?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just in terms of my own experience in the last several years, that led me to formulate this list and coming right out of the design workshop conversations. It like certain things are here only because of my growing understanding of and our general, growing understanding of the centrality of equity and inclusion and diversity work in making the academy a welcoming place where whatever whatever, of course, one's background and demographic identity, but also whatever one's work, that would find expression. Because I'll just really, anecdotally, the Emerging Voices program that we ran for 3 years, which was a kind of COVID rescue postdoc placement in our consortium universities, we ran a colloquium last year and this year. Now Heather's running it. I ran it last year, and we got interesting pushback from a couple of deans, and one in particular who will go unnamed. Precisely, and I'm saying this because of the comment earlier about protecting junior people from service. I mean, yes, but no, and that's why I think the refiguring of the categories has to be so important. It's one of the things I heard from some of the colloquium participants last year, and this was focused on people with unusual trajectories and from underrepresented backgrounds in academia, historically marginalized and currently marginalized groups, and a lot of these young scholars or professional young scholars, they want to figure out how the university runs because they want to run it, they want to change it.
Good.
And so I started seeing like the glimmering of hope that we aren't just replicating ourselves, we are actually pulling people in, and now we have to figure out how to reward the work they're doing. And I don't mean to characterize everyone in the same way, like there's a lot of nuance, and there were certainly scholars from underrepresented backgrounds who said, why do we have to sit through this talk from a CFO, because I really just want to do my research.
Right.
So I'm not saying everyone's the same.
If you don't know where the money is, you
Yeah,
don't
you
know
gotta
where
know
the
where the
values are.
Yeah.
But I was going to say that I just want to throw a cautionary note out there. One of the things that we found in our IA project was a real concern about this idea of administrating DEI work to be this kind of, again, another mode of counting, another mode of doing the kinds of nonsense that we've been talking about up here, and just being really mindful of how we use these words as code, and then they start to mean absolutely fucking nothing. Excuse my French.
No, please use French.
18th century French.
Not the poetic kind. Well, on that note, I'd like to, thank you, amazing. Thank you to the audience. We'll reconvene at 1:15, and we're going to begin with a panel of some of the best and the brightest of the early career people at WashU, showing us what they can do, followed by a discussion with some equally best and brightest of our senior faculty, talking about what support the university can bring to the kind of new work they're doing. So thank you, everybody, and see you back here at 1:15.